Hi, this is David Marquet, and welcome to the Inspiring Leadership Series.
David, thank you very much for being on the series. It's a real honor and a privilege. And for those listening who do not know David, David is a retired US Naval commander of the USS Santa Fe, which was a nuclear submarine. He took it from being worst in the fleet to being best in the fleet. But since his time in the Navy, he has made an even bigger impact because although Santa Fe continues getting honors and awards even after he's left because of the legacy he's left, um, two excellent books. Firstly, Turn the Ship Around, which I love, and there's a workbook, another book that goes with that. And then Leadership is Language, which is a must read for all the CEOs and the senior execs I'm with. And many who are in some of the top companies have loved having David as a speaker. He's been said, whether it be Google or whatever else, they said he's the best speaker we've ever had. So it's for me, David, a real honor to have a fellow serviceman. My father was a naval officer, so this means an awful lot. Welcome to the series.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me on your show.
Yeah, well, great. Let's just begin. I'm very interested in what you're currently doing. A little bit more about, okay, we're in pandemic, so you can't get around as much. What are you currently doing? But some of the key points in your life journey that got you to becoming the commander of the Santa Fe and turning around a failing ship.
Yeah, well, my life changed dramatically with the pandemic because I was a keynote speaker and I really enjoyed flying around and meeting all these different people in different parts of the world. And I have to tell you that having been in India and East Asia and China, as well as throughout Europe, South America, and the United States, people are more alike than there's this tendency to think. And I hear this excuse about, well, it's this culture or my culture. Usually people talk about someone else's culture. Well, their culture isn't very empowering. And it is all hogwash in my mind. First of all, you're not in their culture, so stop talking about it. But my overriding impression of humanity is we basically all want the same things to like a 99.9% level. And then when the COVID hit, we had to shift everything to online. I have to tell you, it's horrible. And anyone who's done a speech or a presentation online, you see zero people. Maybe you see your own picture, maybe you see 25 people on the Zoom screen, but they're small, you don't really get the engagement. And so I had to kind of learn how to try and come through the camera in a way that was that was irrelevant. But we've been able to do that. We've been very successful with our Zoom things. One of the things that you see here is we don't use slide share because that makes the speaker disappear. We do everything with virtual backgrounds, which I think is a more engaging way to do it. And what we're doing now is focusing on developing partners around the world who are interested in developing intent-based leadership. We'll talk about what intent-based leadership is and the effect that it's having. But the phrase we use is global brand, local delivery. And we have partners in the UK, in Europe, in New Zealand, and around the world to deliver this stuff. Anyway, that seemed like a little long-winded before we actually talk about what it is.
No, but it's great to hear that. And perhaps would you just tell us in a bit of a nutshell what is intent-based leadership and leader?
So the idea comes from my experience as a submarine commander, and at the core of it, intent-based leadership is about aligning control, our actual control, to what we can control. And it's about creating environments. The role of the leader is to create an environment where people can think, take ownership, and make decisions. Now, you may say, well, this sounds very similar to what I'm used to. It's not, most likely. What most people are used to are hierarchies where we are trying to control the people below us. We make decisions. In any structure where we make a decision for someone else, sorry. So intent-based leadership is about this idea of we're going to create an environment where people have control over their work, because we know when they have control over their work, they're healthier, they're happier, they're more engaged. You get more thinking out of them. It's more fun. And by the way, did I say healthier? Yeah, we live longer. We have better our body weight. We have less toxins in our body, and we carry less stress home. And the problem is, in most organizations, leaders think of themselves as decision makers, which means that you're getting somebody else to do what you decided for them to do. So you're trying to control people. And oh, by the way, you're being controlled by your boss. And this mismatch of control, because you can't actually control other people, and being controlled doesn't feel good. And it's this mismatch of control which results in the horrendous stress and toxins that we see in the workplace, which there was a study by Stanford University that said stress and toxic workplaces are the 5th leading cause of death in the United States. Now, this is pre-COVID, so it's probably the 6th leading cause at this point, but that's a huge number of deaths caused by simply the wrong work, the wrong paradigm of how we organize humanity. And it comes from the industrial age, where we have leaders and followers, thinkers and doers, management and workers. And the idea was these people made decisions and got these other people to do it. Now what you want is to let the people doing the work have decision-making rights over the work to the greatest degree possible. We call this pushing authority to where the information is. So instead of this traditional approach, which, oh, well, all the people on the periphery of the organization, the person writing the code, the person flying the airplane, the person doing the operation, the person meeting the salesman, meeting with the client, the front desk clerk who has the person checking in the hotel right in front. Those people have to write reports or be subject to various monitoring programs which aggregate and feed the information to decision makers up here, who then make decisions and it comes back down. This is not going to allow you to win going forward. What you want to do is take the decision-making authority and push it out to the people who natively have the information. You get closer coupling between the people with the information and the authority to make decisions, so you get better decisions, you get ownership, and you get greater thinking. The greatest paucity and the most constrained resource in organizations now, the most underutilized resources, is what's going on here. It's people's brains. It's not your supply chain or anything else like that. It's what is the proportion of the thinking that I'm getting in the organization out of everybody.
Yeah. Fantastic. And I mean, you learned a lot as a commander of a submarine. You studied for one submarine, you didn't get that one. They changed the plan, you took over another submarine. And you had this sort of moment you look back on, which was so key for the book and all that you teach. If you were thinking back to yourself as a young 18-year-old naval officer, knowing what you know now, what bit of wisdom would you give to your younger self, which others who are young and starting out could go, that's a really good bit of wisdom?
Well, I think of my journey in 3 basic steps. Number 1, it's me as an individual contributor. I need to study, I need to know my craft, I need to do what I need to, what I'm told, maybe, but what I need to do to support the organization is about my individual performance. Then I graduate, and now I have a team. And now I think of myself as, okay, I'm the decision maker for the team. So I'm extending what I'm doing to the team. But the final step is, and this can happen when you're at the top of the organization and to a lesser degree when you're in the middle, but I am now the architect of a decision-making factory. So in other words, my focus is not solely on making the product that we're making, but it's on enabling the decisions, enabling the team to make the decisions that will support the product that we're making. And in that role, the only decisions I want to make are how to design and construct that factory, the decision-making factory, not the widget-making factory. And so this means like, how do we run the meetings? How do we interact? What are the normative forms of communication? How do we ask questions as a norm? How do I express vulnerability? How much vulnerability? How do we talk about uncertainty and ambiguity as opposed to certainty and the arrogance of thinking, oh, we know the answer? And when you design that system, and it means the policies and decision-making architecture, but for us, it really is about the language that you use. And my hypothesis is that we're all using what's fundamentally an industrial age language, because language changes over generations, but work is changing more rapidly. So work now is changing faster than the language has changed. Over the past 10,000 years, work changed slowly and language was basically able to keep up. But now there's been this decoupling between the speed of change of work, which is now emphasizing thinking much more rapidly, much more dramatically. But the language is still emphasizing doing. Yeah. And it's this mismatch that's causing the stress that we feel in the workplace.
Yeah. And I love that in leadership as language. And with a daughter who did linguistics at Cambridge, we have lots of discussions. And the other daughter did English at Bristol University about the words. Words create worlds. And another interesting aspect that you touch on in your books, which I find profound, is around trust, psychological safety, integrity, and the values you live by. And I'm just interested, from your own point of view, what have been your key values which have informed the work you do, but also looking back when you were an officer, what happened when your values slipped and how did you recover? What did you learn from that?
Yeah, so I think I grew up during the Cold War in the United States, and I was this bookish, geekish math team, chess club kind of person. But I really, in my core, felt passionately about the values of Western civilization, so to speak, as opposed to the communist USSR approach, where people could choose their own religion, they could choose their own spouse, they could choose their own profession, they could choose where to live, and they would feel secure in their lives. And so for me, because of that, and I made a decision to go in the military because of my sort of very introverted nature. Submarines appealed to me because the submarine sort of hides from the rest of the world, and it kind of fit. And as submarines were very sort of bookish, geekish kind of people. But I still felt a lot like an outsider. For the bulk of my career, I felt like I was a person who didn't really understand that you're supposed to just do what you're told, not ask too many questions. I always had a lot of stuff going on in my head, and I was like, well, why are we doing it that way? I raised my hand. Why are we doing it? Like, I have an idea, and I was the annoying person, and it was uncomfortable. I didn't like being told what to do, especially when I thought what I was being told what to do was not optimal. And so I gained an appreciation for the value of different thinking. And whenever people would come to me with different ideas, even if I think they're not that good on the surface, I would always try and be curious about them. I'll give you an example right now. The COVID vaccines are rolling out. Pfizer's approved, Moderna's going to be approved. They're starting to give shots in the United States. And I think you should get a vaccine. If you ask me right now, that's what I would say. We got a lot of people who are like, they're very skeptical of getting a vaccine. And 20 or 40 years ago, my thinking might be, well, those people are wrong, or they don't understand, blah, blah, blah. But now, if I had a chance to talk to one of them, I'd really be curious about what their thinking. And the other thing is I appreciate the fact that not everyone in humanity is going to get the vaccine, because let's just say all humans got the vaccine, and over the next 1,000 years, we have 1,000 of these plagues, but it only takes one of those to have a bad vaccine and we wipe out humanity, and then there's zero. So the fact that there's variability in the population and that some people choose not, are skeptical about the vaccine, is adaptive survival from the level of the species. You don't want everyone to just line up and get the shot. So I appreciate, now I'm going to get the shot, but I'm trying to learn to appreciate these divergent opinions, even if I don't agree with them in the end. First, be curious about what do they see that I don't see, and then work. It's much less to me clear than this, because we're making decisions about the future, which is always unknowable. We would always, one of the fundamental things is always talk in terms of probability. How sure are you? How safe is it? How likely is it to work? Not will it work? Is it safe? Are you sure? But these are the things that I heard myself saying over and over again. It was unhelpful. So I had to re-script all that programming.
Yeah.
And I think the programming comes from, one, it's a shortcut, because I'm not really, because it takes time and it's so hard, blah, blah, blah. And number two, it's really embedded in coercion. It's, will it work? That's a coercion. Are you sure? Blah, 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 right? Blah, blah, blah. Does that make sense? That's a coercion, because I'm trying to get this. Not, you know, if what I want to say is blah, 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 explanation, blah, 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 blah. How do you see it? Or how is that wrong? Or what didn't make sense? Not, does that make sense? Yeah. But we find ourselves saying that over and over.
And that leads very nicely into the other thing I was interested in, which is around meaning and purpose and the reason why you do what you do, which comes back to intent and how you explain, guys, as the boss, as the commander, this is my intent. Okay. Commander's intent. What's your intent? How are you going to achieve it? Tell me. So what's your view on sort of what gives people meaning, purpose in their jobs, in their work? I mean, you're with businesses a lot of the time now, but how important is meaning and purpose in people's lives?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, I think it changes based on your situation and based on your age. It certainly has for me. I think that, I mean, my passion comes from these feelings that I had, then seeing what happens when you let people make decisions. I mean, the story on the submarine is, we went from permission-based to intent-based, where instead of saying, I'd like permission to do something, and if I don't hear a yes, the answer is no. So the default is no. In the absence of a response is no. We would say, state what you intend to do, justify it, and the absence of a response now is yes. Now that may seem like not a big deal, but it's huge. Because now I was leaning back. Before I was always like, make it happen, make it happen, make it happen. And my picture was, I only have a brake pedal. I'm not gonna make it happen. The team's gonna make it happen. I gotta create a space where they have so much initiative, energy, and a bias for action that they're pushing into me. And it happens by you leaning back. Step one is you lean back. Not they take initiative, then you lean back. It's you lean back, then they take initiative. So for me, I've seen and suffered through toxic leadership, and it's had an effect on my health. And I don't want my kids to have to deal with it. I don't want any other human beings to have to deal with this. The tragedy is these are good people trying to do what they've been told to do, which is to control other human beings. Yeah. So it's not evil people. There are evil people, but they're very few. It's wide swaths of well-meaning people, but they've got the wrong program. They're running the wrong program. And whether it starts with parenting and then moves into the workplace or whatever it happens to be, we're hurting people, other people. We're also hurting ourselves. We think we're not, but we are. Yeah. And we have stress because we're trying to control these people. We're running around, do this, do this, do this. I went around, did you do it? Did you do it? Oh, look, now I got to hold you accountable. If you feel like accountability is the thing you need, you're doing it wrong, because when you've designed the organization right, people hold themselves accountable. You can't hold another human accountable. I fundamentally believe that. Like, how am I going to hold, like, I can only hold myself accountable for my own actions. I can suffer the consequences of my actions, and there may be a system which results in that. But in terms of me feeling like I need to do more or better,
Yeah, yeah. And
the greatest things from humanity, you can do be average and tell people what to do. So, sorry, just this popped in my head.
yeah,
But the greatest things in humanity are never achieved because someone ordered people to do something. You look at the top sports people, you look at the top geniuses and like, no one ordered Einstein or Newton to dream up the laws of physics and fundamentally change the way we think about the universe. They didn't do that because they were ordered to.
I think it's a really important point. That it's got to come from people, and I'm almost hearing. I read a lot of Stoic philosophy, and Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca, and this. The only thing you can control is the control of controllables, which is your thoughts and your actions. I can't control your thoughts and I can influence, but I can't control them.
Exactly.
And so it's lovely. That really resonates deeply with a lot of the wider reading and practical experience I've had as an Army officer myself for 20 years. And the other thing you've talked a lot about, which is so salient, is health and well-being, or what we call health quotient. Your mental health and your physical health. And a lot of the CEOs and the teams that I'm speaking to and that have been on the series, either some of them have had mental breakdowns, or their mental health is not good, or they haven't looked after their physical health. I'd love you to just talk a bit more about health, mental and physical, and how important it is in this approach that you take as well.
Yeah, it is very important. So you got to take care of yourself. And the one thing I see, especially now with this COVID, you got to control your own day. A lot of what feels out there feels out of control. And so we have this natural stress response. But if you were going to control one thing, control your bedtime. So for example, for me, say, okay, 10:30 is my bedtime. 10 o'clock, all electronic devices are off. 8 o'clock, I'm done eating food. And you don't need to go that far. Just pick a time. Just go to turn the lights off. This is my lights off time, and control that. Because if you don't control your wake up time, control the bedtime. Because if you don't control the bedtime, you're not going to get to bed in time. You're not going to get the right amount of sleep. So it all starts with bedtime, not wake up time. Yeah. And when you do that, and you do it for 100 days, you send the signal to your body, you're in control of this piece, and you will feel in control. And when you wake up, you'll be more refreshed, and you have this more sort of relaxing, reserved, calm, quiet confidence. Calm, quiet confidence is contagious. Chaos and panic is contagious too. But it will be hard for you to put a finger on it. But when your team engages with you, you won't be flapping around like your arms, and you won't be excitable, and you won't be blowing up, and you won't be asking pointed questions that you wish you hadn't. You'll exude this calm, quiet, and then they'll adopt that persona, and it'll cascade down. So my one thing is, we have a series. If you look on a YouTube channel called the 6 R's for Coronavirus, but they actually could extend to life, but they all start with R, but they're ways of being and behaving during this time, but they're all about controlling what I can control. And like I said, start with bedtime.
Fantastic. And then that sort of leads me on to a thought about IQ versus EQ, and particularly the US military, both Navy, Army, Air Force, get very bright people to academies like West Point and things. As you say, you're quite bookish. And then they also want the EQ as well. And you're in a lot of top businesses where IQ was championed, but in our research, we found that IQ only accounts for 6% of people's performance, whereas EQ accounts for 30%. and the 4% is the other aspects I'm talking about. But what's your view on IQ, EQ, and how you've helped people develop that rapport, listening skills, shutting up, as you say, not being the answer man? What's been your experience of IQ versus EQ?
Yeah, I'm high IQ, low EQ person. That's my bin. And my high IQ actually, I think, fed my low EQ, because I would see the problems before other people, and I would see the solutions before other people, and I would just blurt it out. And I would say, "Oh no, that's wrong. Look, do it this way. That's how obvious is that?" And it wasn't very considerate. So EQ has been the thing I work on. In triathlons, we say, train your weakness, race your strength. So swimming is my weakness, cycling is my strength. So in my workouts, I have to focus on the swimming technique, but in a race, I'm going to pound it out on the bike. So everyone passes me on the swim, I pass them on the bike, they all pass me on the run. But in any event, so for me, when I really need to be in a performance mode, yeah, I'm going to kind of summon forth that really cleverness. But by the way, I can tell it's deteriorating. My IQ, my ability to focus for long periods of time, for example, is deteriorating. Every once in a while, I sense I can forget a word now, which I would have never. I forget the person's name, which I would have not done. So it deteriorates, and that's part of life. But I would kind of summon forth that and like rest on those crutches. But so all my books started self-help. I mean, certainly this Leadership is Language was all self-help. I would find myself saying things, and I would say like, nah, that didn't have the right outcome. That made it harder for people to tell me I was wrong when I wanted to make it easier for them. But I would find that these are just things I would program say. And so I had this big list. And so, well, what are the patterns in this big list? I couldn't remember the whole list. And that's where we end up with the structure of the book, which is there's basically, we do two things in life. One's active, doing, one's reflective, thinking. And they use the brain in different ways. And so they require different languages.
Yeah. I think it's brilliant. And you've triggered a number of things. One is, I'm a fellow triathlete. I'm not anything like as good as you, I'm sure, but every year until the pandemic, I was doing one from when I was 50, and I'm approaching 60 now. And I love it. And I think, almost this pandemic is like it's a triathlon, in that each of the activities, the swim, we don't know how many times we're going to have to go around the buoy. And then there's a transition. All right, it's transition now. And then you got to adapt to getting on the bike, but you don't know how many times you're going to circuit on the bike. And then the run of an indeterminate length. So I find that a very good analogy. But the second one is this whole thing that you talked in your book about, don't be the answer man. And time and again, I come across super bright executives, often CEOs, who go from A to Z and they just say, that's the answer. And no one's taken with them. And so they infantilize everybody else. They make them like children, and they go, okay, what do we do now? What do we do now? And they come to the boss for the answer. And they go away and do this, and they go away and do that. They've done that now. What now? And of course, as you said, 135 people, and they weren't thinking, but then you made them all thinking. That little cartoon of greatness, which is so well sketched out, where their little light bulbs come out and they're all thinking for themselves. And I so wish that for so many organizations, because these bosses, they get the ego kick from being the answer man. And the status that comes from ripping off the shirt and there's the Superman logo, but people aren't thinking for themselves. And so I think you've really nailed something quite profound. And the act of shutting up, not just in order to shut up, but to be curious where they're going to go in their thinking before you interrupt and think for them. That is emotional intelligence.
That's the key. And I think, look, I've done it 100 times. I did 1,000 times. When we were getting ready, when I was in the pre-command school, there was this sort of semi-famous story in the submarine force. I conceived of this new way. We were doing submarine on submarine combat, which is sort of like the varsity level of varsity level combat, where we were going against another U.S. nuclear submarine, which was simulating a bad guy. And typically it's you don't hear the submarine until it's too late, but they don't hear you until it's too late, and it's sort of this messy knife fight, and everyone gets cut. No one really. So anyway, I conceived this new approach, this new tactic, which was a little bit artificial, but it would work in the situation because I knew they were American, so I knew how they were going to react. Anyway, so it's all in my head. I know exactly what I want to do. I have this team around me, including other prospective commanding officers. And I just sort of very briefly say, look, here's what we're going to do, blah, 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 and it's going to work out like this. The whole thing is played out in my head. It plays out exactly like I imagined. But the team is not with me. They're like, what? No, it's not really right. And I say, no, just push the button. I actually at one point pushed the guy aside, leaned over and pushed a button on his panel. This is a big note. We lived, we killed them, huge win, I thought. The instructor brought me aside. He chewed my butt. I was like, what is all this? And he gave me basically what you were saying. And this was before I took over on the Santa Fe. And it really, it sort of gives me anxiety just to now tell the story because I can picture myself getting my butt chewed by the instructor and how I went from feeling so accomplishful to such a lousy.
Oh, yeah. I David, I so relate to that. When I was an instructor at the military academy as a platoon commander, I thought I had to be the hardest, nastiest bastard, driving them hard, firing the ones who couldn't make it. I was awful. I mean, just like it was terrible because I was trying to do it all myself rather than getting them to think for themselves. And that leads me on nicely to resilience, which, you know, you've built it into the system of people thinking for themselves.
Yeah.
And the other lovely thing that I so enjoyed in your book was you made vulnerability that only the strong can be vulnerable. It's not about weakness. Actually, vulnerability is about strength. You admit you don't know. And we had General Sir Rupert Smith, who commanded the British Armored Division in the Gulf War. And he's a really great strategist. And he'd often be in meetings, in a conference, he'd come to the back of the room and they go, General, what do you think? He said, guys, it's not about what I think, it's what you think. So actually, I'm not the expert here. You guys are. Tell me what you think. And I just love that approach. How have you, you know, maybe a story of adversity where you were vulnerable, but you learned from it? I mean, that's a lovely story, but anything else that you'd share? Or maybe even stories from business that you've come across?
Yeah, well, look, saying I don't know is super powerful. I think, I mean, I was doing an event in Singapore. A lady stood up, said, I cannot say I don't know, I lose too much face. And it's like, well, that's your problem. That's on you. That's, if you can't say I don't know, you can't learn. You can't learn. You're never going to get any better than you are, and you're going to be past. You're going to be out of business in 3 years. So I like to make it like a sport. So a lot of times we give CEOs little activities to run. Saying I don't know is one that we end up giving a lot of them. And the key is, first of all, you got to say I don't know when you actually don't know. So that's like level 1 performance. And there's an integrity there. But the second part is, say you don't know or you're not sure, even when you think you know the answer. Because if it involves the future, you're never going to be 100% correct. And all estimates about the future, we never let people vote 0 or 100. It's always 1 to 99 because it's a probabilistic approach. I had an experience when I was on the Submarine where I said, I don't know, early, and thinking like this was the scariest moment of my time. And then I looked around and it was like, there was this fog that just cleared like that. And now the air was just clear and the masks all fell off. And the team started saying, like, I don't know, we'll look it up. I don't know, I'll check it out. I don't know, let's run an experiment. I don't know, let's refer to the manual. And that was so liberating for me as well as the team. And I call it the get better self. Like in the past, my be good self, that persona that wanted to justify, that's attached to my ego, that comes from ego defense, that says, oh, I'm a good person, oh, think well of me, blah, 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 would get in the way and crowd out the behaviors of being better. And so I was as good as I was, but my upward trajectory was relatively flat.
Yeah.
As opposed to wherever I start with a higher upward trajectory, I'm going to end up higher.
Yeah.
As an organization, as an individual. So
it's brilliant, that approach, the be good, moving to get better, and also being imperfect. And in the approach that you have, how are you finding it helps? And this is probably my final area I'm really interested in. How do you find it helps with virtual teams when they've got we're all working on Zoom, and they've got to make some key decisions about, how they allocate resources or whatever it is, and the CEO's sitting there trying to make sense of a whole mass of information. What 2 or 3 tips do you find works well in virtual meetings when decisions need to be made by an executive?
Okay, so the first thing is, if you're the most senior person in the meeting, you don't want to be the decision maker. The reason is because if you make the decision, the probabilities of other people challenging the decision have just dropped by a factor of 10. You want someone else, get someone, the closest person who's appropriate for making the decision, see if they can make the decision, and you're now the decision evaluator, because you've decoupled the passion of the ego defense, which instead of being, it attaches to the decision, and now I have to defend the decision as well as with my ego, as opposed to, okay, well, you make the decision, I'll take a look at it dispassionately. Every time you make a decision, you can do it. You just need to know you're now contaminated. You no longer you can no longer evaluate the decision. And in the face of evidence that it's a bad decision, your brain will trip you up. It'll muster all these reasons why, no, we just got to try harder. We got to do it longer. It'll work out, blah, 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 until you bankrupt. So that's the first thing. But now let's say you're the person who's actually making the decision and you have the group. I would ask, and we would do this on the Submarine, and really you do it on Zoom, but you say, hey, 1 to 99, you can do a Zoom poll, or we use hands a lot, where we go 0 to 5. So I'd say, hey, okay, we got to launch, we're scheduled to launch the new product next week.
Fist to 5, don't you? You go fist to 5.
Fist to 5, yeah. We're scheduled to launch a product next week. We're going to make a decision. Are we going to launch it? The question I'm asking you is, how ready are we for product launch? Now, note, this happens before the conversation. We should vote and then discuss. Most people do the opposite. And the result of discussion narrows the variability of thinking. It reduces variability because it's suppressing the ability for outlying people, because of social pressure, to say, no, I see it differently. So we vote separately. Now, if in a safe place, we can just say, ready, hands. And on Zoom, everyone just pops their hands. I take a quick screenshot, and then I look around and say, okay, I got a whole bunch of 4s and 5s. I say, vote 0 if you're dead set. If you think we're not ready to launch, vote 5 if we're as ready as we're ever going to be to launch. See a bunch of 4s and 5s, people are enthusiastic about launching, but then you see a 2. What you want to do is investigate the 2. You're looking for the outlier. The outliers are very valuable. All innovation comes from outlying opinions. It's always the outlying opinion, and that's the innovation. Because if it weren't an outlying opinion, it wouldn't be an innovation. It'd be the thing that we're already doing. So now, not every outlying opinion is an innovation, but every innovation starts being an outlying opinion. So we look for the 2. We say, oh, let's hear about that. Now, if the group is split, you got a lot of 0s and 1s, you got a lot of 4s and 5s. Then look for the group that's smaller. Let's say you got 10 people voting, you got 4 on one side, 6 on the other. Go for the 4. Always let the minority speak before you let the majority speak. And one of the things that's cool about Zoom is all the boxes are the same size. If an industrial age, if the CEO of Volkswagen had designed Zoom, the previous guy I'm talking about, he would have designed it so that the boxes were proportional to how much you were getting paid. So as a CEO, I get a really big box and a really big voice, and I suck up all the oxygen out of the room because I have to feel good about myself. And you, the little employee, the engineer actually knows what's going on with diesel engines. You're gonna have a little tiny box. But fortunately, it's not the way it is. Everyone has the same size box.
Yeah, It's great. We're almost at an end because you have a hard stop, and I want to have a bit of a chat when we come off air. If you just stay online, but really, I suppose the final thing is I'm thinking about legacy and a final tip. And I mean, your legacy is already, you made a profound difference to me, and I'm someone who pays things forward, so I share it with others. And so many organizations have said they've had you as a speaker, or they've listened to stuff you've done, so that you've already made a huge legacy. But what would you like your legacy to be, and what's your final top tip you'd leave us with before we go off air and you and I have a chat?
My dream is that for the people and the leaders who believe in humanity, that we create a world where people can use their brains. And what I see is algorithms and bots are eating they're eating the doing work. So here's an industrial age factory. So in this factory, we see one person here who's the foreman. He doesn't have anything in front of him, maybe some papers. That's the thinker. These are the doers. All these jobs are going away because if the job can be described as a series of tasks, then I can program that into a robot and it's going away. All that's going to be left is thinking, which I think humans like. We love solving problems. We love using the thing that makes us human, our brain. We actually are very bad at this kind of work. And so it's going to create this place where humanity, in the right environments, we can feel more human. We'll be healthier and we'll be happier and we'll be more successful in our lives, and we'll have everything that we need. But it needs to come from redesigning the fundamental interaction in the workplace. And we got to walk away from this dichotomy of I'm the leader, you're the follower. Now, followership is a segue, is embedded in this. The key is we don't follow individuals like, oh, I'll follow you. We follow the principles of the organization, including the person at the top. So we all follow the principles, but we all lead ourselves in terms of how we live those principles. And so for me, I mean, obviously we're never going to get there for a long, long time, but just not having work be so terrible would be great. And for me, there's a couple of things that you can do. We think about leadership like a sport, things you can practice. For me, it's about control. And so one of the things I do is I try and find something to give control over. When I go to a restaurant, I say, hey, waiter, server, can you pick for me? And they'll say, oh, sure, well, I recommend the chicken. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'll know what it is when you put it in front of me. Don't play it safe. You know what looks good in the kitchen. You know what people like. I might give them some constraints, like I don't eat beef, but the decision is yours. And so you can practice that and you'll see, oh, how does it feel? And you have to make it safe for the person to make that decision. And now with COVID, I go to somebody else, hey, pick my next book for me to read. And again, you're going to put constraints, that's providing clarity, but it's the practice of how does it feel and can I do it? It's not, don't talk about it, just practice it.
Yeah.
And so that's the key thing I want to leave with people is practice giving up control. And the key word there is practice, not talk about it, not think about it, not dream about it, but actually take something in your life, whatever it is that you're like what movie you're going to watch or what you're going to do on the weekend or who's driving the car or how you stack the dishwasher or whatever it happens to be, and give up control to somebody else. And you'll find, I think, when you can then apply that at work, you'll have less stress. You'll be able to think better. Your team will be happier. You'll be healthier. And the world will be a better place.
We're off to the races, as you say. You're off to the races. David, thank you so much. Please stay online, but I just really valued that. We could have talked for hours. And I know people who listen to this is going to be going out to 50 countries on 10 different platforms. It's going to be on YouTube. It's going to be on LinkedIn. People will really value this. So thank you so much for your time. It's been great having you on the series.
Cheers, Jonathan.
Thanks.